Reprogram your life. Most people imagine that their lives are shaped by great events, by singular disasters or rare opportunities that descend upon them like storms from the sky. They wait, therefore, for something dramatic to happen before they believe change is possible. But the truth is quieter, more unsettling, and more hopeful at the same time. Your life, as it stands today, is largely the result of what you have repeatedly told yourself to be true. Not once, not loudly, but patiently, daily, often without words at all. You have been living inside a program, and like most programs, it was not conscious, written by you. From childhood onward, ideas were planted like seeds. Some were spoken plainly by parents, teachers, friends, or rivals. Others were absorbed silently from disappointment, from praise, from failure, from comparison. Over time, these ideas hardened into assumptions, and those assumptions became habits of thought. Eventually, you stopped noticing them. You did not wake up each morning and say, "I believe I am limited," or "I believe I am capable." You simply acted as though one of those statements were true. An action, repeated long enough, always becomes identity. To reprogram your life, then, is not to perform some sudden act of heroism. It is to return to the hidden workshop of the mind and examine the tools that have been shaping you all along. It is to ask, with unusual honesty, what ideas you have allowed to rule you, and whether they deserve such authority. This is not a comfortable exercise, because some of the ideas we live by are familiar in the way an old prison can feel familiar to its inmates. The walls are known, the routines predictable. Freedom, by contrast, feels risky because it demands responsibility. One of the great illusions we carry is that motivation arrives first and action follows. We tell ourselves that one day we will feel ready, inspired, confident, and then we will begin. But this is a reversal of how the human soul actually works. Motivation is more often the child of action than its parent. When you act differently, even in small ways, you send a new message to your mind about who you are. The mind, eager for consistency, begins to adjust its beliefs to match the behavior. In this way, you do not wait to become a new person before you act, and through acting you become. Reprogramming your life therefore begins with attention. You must learn to listen to the quiet commentary running beneath your days. Notice how you speak to yourself when you fail, when you succeed, when you are alone, when you are afraid. Is the voice harsh, dismissive, quick to condemn? Or is it honest yet firm, encouraging without being indulgent? Many people would never tolerate from a stranger the tone they use on themselves daily. Yet they wonder why their confidence withers and their energy fades. A mind constantly under attack cannot build a strong life. But attention alone is not enough. You must also practice deliberate replacement. When an old thought appears, you do not simply argue with it or wish it away. You introduce a new thought and give it repeated opportunities to prove itself through action. Suppose you have long believed that you are incapable of discipline. That belief did not arrive overnight, and it will not leave in a single moment of insight. But if you choose one small, manageable act of discipline and perform it daily, you begin to undermine the old belief. The mind, confronted with evidence, is forced to revise its conclusion. This is why small habits matter far more than dramatic resolutions. A life is rarely transformed by vows shouted in moments of emotion. It is transformed by quiet commitments kept when no one is watching. Each small act is a line of code rewritten. Each repeated choice says, "This is who I am becoming." Over time, the accumulation of these choices changes not only what you do, but what you believe you can do. And belief, once altered, opens doors that previously felt locked. There is, however, a danger in the process of reprogramming, the temptation to despise your past self. When you begin to see how much of your life has been shaped by unexamined beliefs, you may feel regret, even anger, at the years you believe were wasted. But this too is a trap. The past version of you was operating with the knowledge and awareness available at the time. To attack that version is simply to continue the habit of inner hostility, now dressed up as self-improvement. True reprogramming requires a kind of humility. You acknowledge that you were shaped, not ruined, influenced, not doomed. You thank the past for what it taught you, even through pain, and you take responsibility for what you will do next. Responsibility here does not mean blame. It means authorship. It means recognizing that while you may not have written the original program, you are now holding the pen. Another crucial element is the stories you tell about difficulty. Many people see struggle as evidence that something has gone wrong, that they are failing, or that they are not meant for the path they have chosen. But difficulty is often the very mechanism by which change becomes possible. Resistance reveals where growth is needed. Fatigue exposes limits that must be expanded gradually. Fear points to values that matter deeply. When you reinterpret struggle not as a verdict against you, but as information for you, your entire relationship with effort changes. In this way, reprogramming your life is less about forcing positivity and more about cultivating meaning. You do not need to convince yourself that everything is easy or pleasant. You need to understand why it is worth doing despite discomfort. A person who knows their why can endure a great many hows. Without meaning, even comfort becomes unbearable. With meaning, even hardship becomes purposeful. You must also be careful about the environments you allow to shape you. Just as software behaves differently depending on the system it runs on, so the human mind responds to its surroundings. The people you listen to, the content you consume, the rhythms of your days all reinforce certain patterns of thought. If you wish to reprogram your life, but keep immersing yourself in voices that confirm your limitations, you are fighting against a current stronger than your willpower alone. This does not require dramatic isolation or contempt for others. It requires discernment. Choose inputs that challenge you without crushing you, that inspire without deceiving you, that remind you of what is possible rather than what is fashionable. Over time, these influences seep into your thinking not as commands, but as quiet permissions to imagine yourself differently. Perhaps the most difficult part of reprogramming your life is patience. We live in an age that celebrates speed and instant results, yet the deepest changes operate on a slower clock. The mind resists sudden overhaul, but it yields to steady persistence. There will be days when you feel no progress at all, when the old thoughts return with familiar strength, when the effort seems pointless. These moments are not signs of failure, they are part of the process. A program does not crash simply because it is being updated. If you can learn to persist without constant reassurance, to continue acting in alignment with the person you wish to become, even when the feelings lag behind, you begin to develop a rare kind of confidence. Not the loud, performative confidence that demands applause, but the quiet confidence rooted in self-trust. You know that change is occurring, not because you feel different every day, but because you are choosing differently despite uncertainty. And so, little by little, the inner landscape shifts. The questions you ask yourself change. Where once you asked, "Can I really do this?" you begin to ask, "What is the next honest step?" Where once you waited for permission, you begin to assume responsibility. Where once you saw yourself as a passive recipient of circumstances, you begin to recognize your role as an active participant in shaping them. At this stage, reprogramming is no longer something you are trying to do. It is something you are living. Your thoughts, actions, and identity begin to align, not perfectly, but progressively. Why? You are no longer at war with yourself. You are collaborating with your own growth. And as this collaboration deepens, you may notice that the world itself seems to respond differently. Not because it has changed, but because you are meeting it with a clearer, steadier mind that is no longer running on outdated instructions, but is slowly, deliberately learning how to write new ones. And this learning, once begun, does not announce itself with trumpets or declarations. It unfolds quietly, often unnoticed at first, like dawn arriving while the world still believes it is night. You may not wake up one morning feeling entirely transformed, but you may notice that you no longer react in the same way to the things that once controlled you. A comment that would have wounded you deeply now merely passes through. A fear that once stopped you now hesitates, uncertain of its authority. These small shifts are not accidents. They are signs that the code beneath your life is being rewritten. It is important to understand that reprogramming does not mean erasing your personality or becoming someone artificial. On the contrary, much of what passes for who you are is merely habit masquerading as identity. When you remove the habits that were born of fear, doubt, or imitation, what remains is often more genuine, not less. You begin to act not from compulsion but from choice, and choice is the truest expression of the self. One of the subtle changes you may experience is a new relationship with time. Previously, you may have felt chased by it, haunted by past mistakes, or anxious about future outcomes. But as you take responsibility for your inner life, time becomes less of a threat and more of a resource. The past becomes a teacher rather than a judge. The future becomes a direction rather than a demand. You learn to live more fully in the present, not because you deny consequences, but because you are no longer paralyzed by them. This shift allows you to work with your mind rather than against it. Instead of demanding perfection, you aim for progress. Instead of expecting constant clarity, you learn to move forward even when the path is partially obscured. You discover that confidence is not the absence of doubt, but the willingness to act in its presence. And every time you do so, you reinforce a new internal message that you are capable of navigating uncertainty. At some point, you may notice resistance arising from an unexpected place. Others may begin to respond differently to you. When you change your internal program, you alter the patterns of interaction around you. People who are comfortable with the old version of you may feel unsettled by your growth. This is not because you have become worse, but because you have become less predictable. Predictability is often mistaken for harmony, but it is not the same thing. Here again, patience and discernment are required. You do not need to justify your growth to everyone, nor do you need to abandon compassion. You simply need to remain truthful to the direction you have chosen. Over time, those who can grow with you will adjust, and those who cannot will naturally drift. This, too, is part of reprogramming, though it is rarely discussed. A changed inner life eventually demands a changed outer arrangement. Another sign of genuine reprogramming is a more honest relationship with failure. Failure no longer defines you, nor does it surprise you as deeply as before. You begin to expect setbacks, not with cynicism, but with realism. When something goes wrong, you ask what can be learned, rather than what should be hidden. This attitude does not make you careless, it makes you resilient. You recover more quickly because you no longer see failure as proof of inadequacy but as part of the process of becoming competent. In this way, discipline slowly replaces drama. You no longer rely on emotional highs to sustain effort. You show up even on ordinary days, even when the work feels dull, even when progress is invisible. This is one of the most profound rewrites of all, because it breaks the old dependency on motivation as a fleeting feeling. You become Somu, Ne who acts according to values rather than moods, and values, unlike moods, are stable enough to build a life upon. As this stability grows, you may find that your desires themselves begin to change. Goals that once seemed urgent lose their grip, while others quietly take their place. This is not a loss of ambition, but a refinement of it. You start wanting what aligns with your deeper sense of purpose, rather than what promises quick validation. The noise of comparison fades, and in its place emerges a clearer sense of direction, one that feels less frantic and more grounded. It is worth noting that reprogramming your life does not remove struggle, it redefines it. You still work hard, but the work feels meaningful rather than desperate. You still face uncertainty, but it feels like a challenge rather than a threat. You still experience fear, but it no longer has the final word. In this sense, the goal was never to create a life without difficulty, but a self capable of meeting difficulty without losing direction. Gradually, you may also notice an increased capacity for stillness. When the mind is no longer constantly defending itself against imagined threats, it finds space to rest. Silence becomes less uncomfortable. Reflection becomes less painful. In these quieter moments, insights often arise unforced, as though the mind, no longer crowded by noise, can finally hear itself think. This is not passivity, it is clarity. Clarity, however, brings with it responsibility. Once you see more clearly, you cannot easily return to unconscious living. You become aware of the moments when you are tempted to revert to old patterns, and this awareness removes the excuse of ignorance. But rather than viewing this as a burden, you can learn to see it as a form of freedom. You are no longer at the mercy of impulses you do not understand. You can pause, choose, and act with intention. There will still be moments when the old program attempts to reassert itself, especially under stress. Fatigue, disappointment, and fear have a way of reopening familiar pathways. When this happens, the measure of your growth is not whether the thought appears, but whether you obey it. Each time you choose differently, even once, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen the new. Change is not fragile, it is cumulative. Over time, these cumulative changes alter how you see yourself in the story of your own life. You are no longer merely reacting to chapters as they are written. You are participating in the writing. You understand that while you cannot control every event, you can influence how events shape you. This understanding brings a quiet dignity, a sense that your life is not a random sequence but a coherent journey, even when the destination is not yet fully visible. And so the process continues, not as a project with an end date, but as a way of living. Each day offers new material, new choices, new opportunities to reinforce what you are becoming. The program is never fully complete, because life itself continues to present new conditions, but you are no longer running blindly on inherited instruction. You are awake to the fact that what you think, choose, and repeat matters profoundly. In this ongoing work, you may come to realize that self-motivation is not about constant intensity, but about quiet alignment. When your actions align with your values, when your thoughts support rather than sabotage you, motivation arises naturally, not as a burst of energy, but as a steady willingness to continue. And it is here, in this steady willingness, that the deeper transformation takes root, unfolding further, shaping choices yet to be made, directions yet to be taken, and understanding that have not yet fully revealed themselves. And as this transformation unfolds, you may notice that the very way you perceive obstacles begins to shift. What once seemed like insurmountable barriers now appear as puzzles, and even failure becomes a source of information rather than shame. You learn to listen to the signals embedded in difficulty, to discern which paths are truly worth pursuing and which are diversions disguised as opportunity. Life no longer feels like a chaotic series of events, but a vast, intricate system, one in which your choices act as levers capable of influencing outcomes in ways both subtle and profound. Reprogramming your life also teaches you the delicate art of patience with yourself. There will be moments when you regress, when old habits resurface like weeds sprouting through carefully tended soil. In these moments, it is not helpful to berate yourself, for anger and shame only reinforce the very patterns you wish to change. Instead, observe the resurgence of old thought patterns with curiosity and discipline. Understand why they appear, acknowledge their presence, and gently but firmly choose to act in alignment with your new program. Every time you do so, the old pattern loses power, and the new pattern grows stronger. This process requires a form of inner dialogue that is both disciplined and compassionate. The voice you cultivate within yourself should be firm enough to correct, but gentle enough to nurture. It should challenge your excuses, expose your self-deception, and remind you of your potential without scolding, ridiculing, or crushing your spirit. The balance is subtle, but mastering it is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself, for the way you speak to your own mind ultimately becomes the way you engage with the world. As your inner dialogue strengthens, so does your ability to navigate uncertainty. You begin to understand that not knowing the outcome of an action is not a reason to avoid it. Instead, uncertainty becomes the arena in which growth occurs. You experiment, take risks, make mistakes, and adapt, all while maintaining a core sense of self that is not dictated by external events. This resilience is not born of stubbornness or denial, but of conscious training and repeated evidence that you are capable of responding, recovering, and continuing, no matter what unfolds. A crucial element in reprogramming your life is the mastery of attention. Where you focus, your mind shapes the program itself. Attention is like the steering wheel of a car. It determines the direction in which your life moves. If your attention is habitually drawn toward fear, regret, or envy, you are feeding old programs and reinforcing limitation. If you consciously direct your attention toward curiosity, opportunity, learning, and purpose, you feed the new program, giving it both fuel and direction. Mastering attention requires vigilance, but the returns are extraordinary, for the quality of your life is, to a large extent, determined by the quality of your focus. Alongside attention comes the cultivation of clarity. Many people operate under the illusion of clarity, mistaking busyness or certainty for understanding. True clarity is the ability to see the essential factors at play, to distinguish between what matters and what does not, to prioritize with discernment, and to act decisively based on this insight. Clarity is not a sudden illumination. It is the product of repeated reflection, honest self-assessment, and the elimination of mental clutter. When clarity increases, so does your capacity to act with confidence and consistency. Consistency itself becomes a cornerstone of reprogramming. The human mind is far more responsive to repeated small actions than to occasional grand gestures. A single act of courage, discipline, or honesty has limited impact if not reinforced, but repeated over weeks, months, and years, these acts transform the neural pathways of your mind, the habits of your behavior, and ultimately the trajectory of your life. The incremental nature of progress may feel frustrating in the moment, but it is far more reliable than the fleeting exhilaration of sudden, dramatic change. Another dimension of self-reprogramming is the refinement of desire. When your mind is unexamined, your desires are often dictated by habit, social expectation, or the pursuit of transient pleasure. These desires, unchecked, lead to distraction, dissatisfaction, and confusion. By contrast, when you consciously cultivate your inner life, you begin to notice which desires align with your values, which support growth, and which undermine it. The process of refining desire is subtle. It requires introspection, honesty, and repeated testing in the crucible of action. But it is one of the most profound ways to ensure that the life you are programming is a life worth living. Equally important is the development of emotional literacy. Your emotions are not arbitrary. They carry information about your needs, values, and priorities. Reprogramming your life does not mean suppressing or denying emotion. It means learning to interpret them accurately and respond wisely. Anger may signal boundaries being crossed. Fear may highlight areas requiring reparation. Joy may indicate alignment with purpose. By reading your emotions correctly, you convert them from reactive impulses into strategic guidance, allowing your inner life to function more coherently. Reprogramming also demands an understanding of influence. While your mind is the primary theater of change, your environment acts as a continuous source of reinforcement. This includes not only people, but also the media you consume, the routines you practice, and the physical spaces you inhabit. A cluttered environment or toxic influence can sabotage progress, while a supportive, challenging, and inspiring environment can accelerate it. Conscious curation of external inputs is, therefore, an extension of inner discipline. To reprogram effectively, you must guard your mind not only internally but externally. As your program strengthens, you may notice a new relationship with time emerge. Previously, time may have felt like a relentless river, dragging you along, often against your will. Now, with clarity, focus, and alignment, time becomes a medium through which deliberate action manifests results. You begin to see that productivity is not measured by frantic motion, but by the quality and consistency of your choices. Each moment becomes an opportunity to reinforce the program, to act according to purpose, and to lay another stone in the foundation of your desired life. This new relationship with time also fosters patience with process. Life unfolds according to its own rhythms, not yours. Attempting to rush transformation or force outcomes often results in frustration and failure. Reprogramming is less about speed and more about fidelity to the principles you are cultivating. Each repeated, deliberate act, each choice aligned with the person you are becoming contributes to an exponential accumulation of change. The process may be invisible in the moment, but over time, it reveals itself unmistakably in the trajectory of your life. Another profound aspect of this work is the cultivation of self-responsibility. When you recognize that your inner program shapes the outer circumstances of your life, you can no longer blame circumstances, other people, or luck for your results. Responsibility here is not a burden, but a liberation. It is the recognition that while you may not control all events, you control your response, your interpretation, and the habits that will determine your future. This awareness transforms fear into agency and passivity into action. Alongside responsibility comes the capacity for reflection. Reflection is not mere rumination or regret. It is a deliberate, structured examination of thoughts, behaviors, and outcomes. Through reflection, You identify which aspects of your program are serving you and which are not. You trace patterns, draw conclusions, and plan corrective action. Reflection without judgment transforms mistakes into lessons, uncertainty into insight, and effort into mastery. It is one of the most reliable tools for intentional self-reprogramming over time as attention, clarity, discipline, patience, and reflection take root. You may notice an emergent quality, a quiet self-confidence that is not boastful or defensive but steady and resilient. This confidence does not require external validation, for it is grounded in evidence, the repeated demonstration that you can act according to your intentions, that you can withstand challenge, that you can adjust when necessary. This internal evidence becomes far more compelling than any praise or criticism from the outside world. At this stage, your life begins to show subtle but unmistakable signs of the internal rewrite. Decisions feel easier, priorities clearer, and actions more fluid. The old patterns of procrastination, doubt, and distraction may still appear, but they are no longer commanding forces. They are reminders of what once was. You begin to inhabit your life with intention rather than reaction, with agency rather than drift, and with a deep sense of authorship over the unfolding narrative of your existence. Equally important is the understanding that reprogramming is ongoing. Life will continue to present novel challenges, unexpected disruptions, and new circumstances. The program you write today may need revision tomorrow, but the essential principle remains: conscious, deliberate cultivation of thought, habit, and attention creates a trajectory that is increasingly aligned with your chosen vision of yourself. The act of reprogramming is therefore not a one-time event but a lifelong engagement, a practice that deepens with experience and grows richer as it encounters complexity. This practice also cultivates gratitude, not as a superficial exercise but as a recognition of the resources, insights, and capacities available to you. Gratitude reinforces the program by focusing attention on abundance rather than scarcity, on potential rather than limitation. It is a subtle but powerful amplifier of change, because the mind that is aware of what is already working is far more willing to build upon it than the mind mired in complaint or envy. Gratitude, then, is both a mirror and a lever. It reflects progress and propels it further as this process matures. You may find that your inner narrative, the story you tell yourself about who you are, shifts fundamentally. You no longer see yourself as a passive victim of circumstance, nor as someone at the mercy of fleeting moods or desires. Instead, you recognize yourself as an active participant in the creation of your life, capable of shaping experience through intention, habit, and focus. This realization is profoundly empowering, for it frees you from the tyranny of old patterns while granting full responsibility for the life that unfolds before you. And with this empowerment comes a subtle but transformative sense of freedom. Freedom here is not the absence of constraints, for life always imposes limits, but the ability to choose consciously within them. It is the understanding that external conditions may be unpredictable, but your inner responses, priorities, and decisions are yours to govern. This freedom is not a gift handed to you. It is a capacity cultivated through repeated acts of attention, reflection, and discipline choice. You may also notice that as your internal program strengthens, the quality of your relationships improves. When you act from clarity and consistency, others respond differently. They sense reliability, integrity, and intentionality. You are less likely to be swayed by reactive impulses or momentary frustrations, more able to engage with others from a place of authenticity rather than performance. Your presence becomes stabilizing, your words deliberate, and your actions aligned with principles rather than whims. This alignment radiates outward, influencing not only your own trajectory but the lives of those around you. And as these effects accumulate, your work, your creativity, and your pursuits begin to reflect the inner rewrite. Tasks once dreaded become challenges approached with competence and curiosity. Creative endeavors are nourished by clarity of intention rather than by frantic effort. Goals are pursued with patient persistence rather than impulsive urgency. The energy once wasted on doubt, distraction, or self-criticism is now available for construction, exploration, refinement. Alongside these external manifestations, you may sense a deepening of personal integrity. Why? You act more consistently with your values, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. Your words, thoughts, and deeds gradually align, reducing internal conflict and increasing harmony. Integrity is the natural outcome of a mind that has been deliberately reprogrammed. The inner logic that once sabotaged itself now supports its own highest goals, creating a feedback loop of trust between intention and action. This trust, once established, becomes one of your most valuable assets. It allows you to undertake ambitious projects, navigate uncertainty, and take calculated risks without being paralyzed by doubt. The internal assurance that you are capable of responding, adapting, and persisting strengthens every decision, every relationship, every pursuit. It is the confidence born not of luck or external validation but of repeated demonstration, accumulated over time, that your inner life reliably produces results. And as the program continues to evolve, you may notice subtle shifts in your perception of failure and success. Success is no longer a fleeting moment of external recognition. It becomes the natural outcome of disciplined effort and conscious choice. Failure is no longer a source of despair. It becomes a mirror reflecting what must be adjusted, honed, or refined. This shift transforms not only your actions but also your emotional resilience, creating a sense of equilibrium that is largely independent of circumstance. With each passing day, as attention, reflection, consistency, patience, and clarity continue to be applied, your life becomes less a matter of chance and more a matter of deliberate architecture. Choices accumulate into patterns, patterns into habits, habits into character, and character into destiny. The reprogramming that began as an inward act of self-observation now manifests outwardly in conduct, relationships, achievement, and the steady unfolding of a life increasingly aligned with intention and purpose. In the midst of all this, you may realize that the ultimate goal of reprogramming is not perfection but mastery of the self, in the context of a world that is always imperfect. It is the ability to navigate complexity with composure, to act decisively amid uncertainty, to maintain clarity and direction, even when circumstances are unfavorable. Mastery does not imply the absence of struggle. It implies the capacity to convert struggle into information, obstacle into leverage, and experience into wisdom. And through this ongoing work, you may come to understand a profound truth. The life you live tomorrow will be the cumulative result of the choices you make today. Every thought, word, and action is an input into the internal program that shapes your future. Conscious attention to this program, repeated practice, and deliberate refinement constitute the essence of self-motivation. Motivation is not a fleeting emotional spark. It is the sustained architecture of action. Enforced daily by choice, awareness, and disciplined attention. The act of reprogramming your life, therefore, is both humble and grand. Humble because it begins with small, almost invisible shifts in thought and behavior. Grand because the shifts accumulate into a trajectory that determines the quality, depth, and scope of your existence. And it is ongoing, for life itself is dynamic, and the mind capable of conscious self-direction must continually adapt, refine, and expand its internal software to meet new challenges and opportunities that arise at every turn. And so, after all the effort, attention, patience, and deliberate choice, you arrive at a profound realization. Reprogramming your life is not about waiting for circumstances to change, nor is it about finding sudden inspiration from outside yourself. It is about taking responsibility for your inner world, understanding the patterns that have shaped you, and consciously creating new ones that serve your highest purpose. The power to change, to grow, and to thrive has always been within you quietly, waiting for your awareness, your courage, and your consistency to unlock it. When you commit to this ongoing work of self-mastery, every thought becomes purposeful, every action intentional, and every day a step toward the life you were always capable of living. Your life is no longer a program written by chance or habit. It becomes a masterpiece authored by your own conscious choice. And in that authorship lies freedom, fulfillment, and the extraordinary possibility of becoming exactly who you were meant to be.